Miss Culbertson slaps Miss Barozzini. Miss Barozzini then takes a knife that she had at the side of her person, brandishes that knife to Miss Culbertson and stabs her once in the neck. Miss Culbertson then is later on pronounced deceased.
Two teenage girls, best friends who had a falling out, get into an argument that escalates to this. Now, one is dead and the other was just sentenced to a 3-year prison term. How did a few angry words end in tragedy? And also, did the punishment fit the crime? I'll discuss it all with Ohio criminal defense attorney Diane Menasche. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. In March of 2023, Bryanna Barozzini, who was 18 at the time, and 17-year-old Halia Culbertson were with some friends inside of a smoke shop in northeast Columbus, Ohio. This is near where they lived. Now, they used to be friends, which is why what I'm about to get into makes this even more difficult to understand. They had a feud. That was clear. They had a falling out. And for whatever reason, Halia apparently began yelling at Barozzini and then reportedly challenged Barozzini to a fist fight and went outside to wait for her. And when Barozzini came outside, they apparently had words again, and unfortunately, it did not stop there. One of the friends in this environment captured what happened next on cell phone video.
Hold up, sis!
Hey, get off my sister, bro! Get off my sister! Hey, if you touch my sister again, I'm gonna have to put my phone down, bro. Halia, crunch her to get it over with, bro. Crunch her, get it over with, Halia.
Halia seemingly pushes Barozzini, slaps her face, and that is when Barozzini steps back, but then pulls a knife that she has in her pocket. Now, one of the girl's friends tries to break them up. The two don't listen, and Barozzini stabs Halia in the neck. But her defense attorney, Robert Krepence, interprets this video very differently. He claims that at one point my client produced a knife and displayed it so the assailant would see the knife. That didn't stop her. Culbertson kept coming. She struck my client in the face. My client realized she was not going to stop, so my client swung the knife.
And there, Your Honor, you can see Ms. Culbertson pacing back and forth in front of the store. And there, 22:48 and 24 seconds is when Bryanna and her friend exit the store. Now, it has been certainly implied that she came out to accept the challenge to fight Ms. Culbertson. But I believe that the evidence is anything but that. She comes out with drinks in her hand, not alcoholic drinks, no weapon in her hand, clearly not coming out in order to engage into a fight. Further, as I play this video a little further, we see that she and her boyfriend take a direct path to the car in which they had come. I had counted no less than 30 steps that my client took backwards. She pulled a knife from her pocket and took 15 more steps backwards away from Ms. Culbertson. She didn't want to engage at all.
So Halia, sadly, tragic situation. She is rushed to the hospital, but she dies. She dies soon after. And what does the defendant do?
Miss Barozzini goes home to her house at Pine Oak in the city of Westerville, where the Columbus Police Department eventually finds her clothing in the washing machine, the knife hidden in the crawl space with her shoes, and then she had taken a shower.
This is a really sad case, but it's also an important one to talk about. And one of the reasons we're able to present you these stories and talk about the law and talk about the facts is in large part to the support that we get from our sponsors. And that includes Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. If you should find yourself in a position where you're hurt and you need legal representation, Morgan & Morgan may be who you want in your corner. And they are specialists in this area. And you know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. Verdicts and settlements in the multi-millions across this country. They make the process super easy for their clients because from starting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. So Barozzini is arrested and charged with murder, which carries a sentence of life in prison, but she's also charged with involuntary manslaughter. And with this trial set to begin, some very incriminating evidence turns up that might have put a wrench in this whole self-defense argument. Why? Because apparently Barozzini sent some texts a week before the stabbing to where she wrote, "I'd sooner slice Culbertson's throat if she comes near me again, and I will cut that," expletive, "on my whole family if she tries showing up to my family's home again." So what happens? The defense files a motion asking the judge to prevent prosecutors from showing these messages to the jury. The judge indicates he would allow them to come in. So while Barozzini initially pleads not guilty, just as jury selection is about to begin, she changes her plea.
Ms. Barozzini now wishes to plead guilty to the stipulated lesser included offense as to count 1, involuntary manslaughter, which is a felony of the 3rd degree. That guilty plea would carry with it a maximum potential penalty of 36 months at ODRC, up to a $10,000 fine.
In signing it, you're telling me you want to admit to a felony 3 crime called involuntary manslaughter. When you plead guilty, it is a complete admission you're guilty. You're going to be convicted today, and you're going to be sentenced on July the 11th. It'll be on your record. It's a non-expungable offense. Do you understand the nature of the charge to which you're pleading guilty and what the maximum penalties are?
Yes, Your Honor.
A month later, on Thursday, July 11th, Bryanna Barozzini, now 20 years old, is sentenced to the maximum of 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. But for Halia Culbertson's family, that's not enough. They call Barozzini a villain who deserves more than what she should receive as part of this plea deal. Her grandpa, Harley Langley, says, "My granddaughter was 17 years old. 17 years old. She loved life, and everybody was her new best friend." Culbertson's mother addressed the court in a very emotional victim impact statement.
"This was not just the tragic death of a child. It was a heartbreaking betrayal of a young life taken by someone who was once a best friend. My daughter was not killed by a faceless stranger, but by a person who was once trusted and loved, a friend who knew her, understood her, shared countless moments of her life. This betrayal makes the loss even more profound, as it was not an random act of violence, but a calculated decision made by someone who is supposed to protect and cherish her."
She went on to say, "It feels like a betrayal of my daughter's memory and the justice she was promised. She wished my daughter to hell. She was clearly mad, swore on her whole family her intent, so how does she end up the same place at the same time?" Culbertson's sister, Kaylin, speaks out too.
"I've lost a lot of people in my life, but nothing has scarred me so badly as losing Halia. I don't have many friends in this world, but when I was with my sister, I didn't need anyone else. Because of this, my sister is gone forever, and every time I want to talk to Halia, I have to go sit at a graveyard and talk to her headstone, wishing I could just hear her voice one more time. I wish I could just wake up and run into her room and lay on her bed and hug her and tell her I love her just one more time."
And as for Barozzini, she also addressed the court. This was before she was sentenced.
"Not a day goes by that this incident hasn't been on my mind. I understand and feel for the victim's family, as I know the harm I have caused them is indescribable. I will be living with this guilt the rest of my life." Now, with all that, I want to bring in Ohio criminal defense attorney Diane Menasche to get her thoughts on this, what is a very sad and senseless case. Diane, thank you so much for coming on. What is your impression of this? I know you're from Ohio. What can you tell us about this?
I actually practice in Franklin County Common Pleas Court, where this took place most often. My thoughts are, I think the one piece, Jesse, that's so important about this case is the provocation piece, right? And I think even when we're talking about the victim's family member statements in court, I reviewed those audio clips as well. And I did have an opportunity to talk to the presiding judge last night, and he gave me certainly permission to say that. But they left out the provocation piece. I mean, their daughter went into the convenience store. There was an incident, and actually the employee of the convenience store escorted her out. So she comes out of the store, and Halia, as I will call her, she was waiting. She was escorted out of the store by the employee because she was causing such a scene inside. And instead of leaving the parking lot or leaving the scene, she waits. She waits for the defendant. And she's not alone. And also, I think, she's bigger in size, although she's younger in age. She's certainly bigger in size. And as you said, Jesse, these two women had a history together. So this wasn't the first night that they were meeting. There was some history and clearly hostility between the two. So I think that provocation piece is huge to really understand why ultimately the prosecution dismissed the murder counts and she pled to the involuntary manslaughter.
I think there was an argument for self-defense here. Now, of course, you could say maybe she should have stayed inside the store. Maybe she should have called police. Maybe she should have called for help, right? You can always make that. But going outside, I can, based on what's been laid out, and I haven't seen all the evidence, but I would suggest you can make a self-defense argument. Why do you think they decided, hey, let's plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter, 3 years? 3 years in prison? Is it just they weighed the risks against it? They felt that their self-defense claim just wasn't strong enough? Or it's just the risk of a trial and that the jury might not buy it and she could be facing life in prison?
I think it's all of that. And as that calculus was surely being made by the defendant and her attorney, Robert Crapens, I trust that it wasn't just the text message that you talked about that she sent a week prior, but Jessie also afterwards, she did leave the scene. She did go home to her house. She did change, get rid of her clothes, clean the knife. And so, as you know, there's a jury instruction that would have been read to the jury about consciousness of guilt. And how the jury could perceive that action that she took afterwards. Now, admittedly, she wasn't charged with tampering with evidence, but certainly the actions that she did afterwards and the text message, they would have bookended that situation. And as you said, Jessie, if she had been convicted of the murder, life in prison. And she wouldn't have gotten the option of parole in Ohio until after serving a full 15 years on the murder count.
So, and by the way, if I remember correctly, I think the judge even said, when she was, accepting this plea, that this is probably in your best interest to do this. Having said that, are you surprised that the government accepted this deal or put this deal and allowed her to plead guilty to manslaughter? Because they could have felt they had a strong enough case for murder. You hear the victim's family members who are clearly not happy with this. So are you surprised they accepted a deal like this?
Why I'm not is because of the video evidence. And I did have an opportunity to watch what was played in court. She clearly steps back. And we know that the victim is certainly the aggressor, right? She hits her, slaps the defendant in the face, and then the knife does come out. But she steps back at least 15 steps. And I know you talked about 30. It's even 15, and then it becomes 30 steps. She does try to retreat. And Jessie, there's also some other individuals there. The gentleman or the person that was holding the camera, he's also instigating it. People are trying to intervene, and they're being pushed aside. So certainly things are escalating and percolating before the single incident where the knife is put into her clavicle. I'm not surprised the government dismissed the murder counts. It probably should have just been indicted as an involuntary manslaughter initially based on the video evidence. But as you well know, oftentimes there's, you indict everything and maybe capture something that might be where the case ends up.
Sometimes that can backfire. Jury could say, you're throwing too much out here. It's, you don't even know what your theory of the case is. Let me ask you about this 3 years. So obviously, as I said, the family doesn't feel that's enough. That's the maximum, I believe, for involuntary manslaughter. But did you expect the judge to go lower than that? Or is 3 years, you think, appropriate given the facts of this case?
Well, the judge at the plea hearing, as I understand it, and again, we talked to him last night, indicated to the defendant that he was certainly likely to send her to prison, but that if she went to prison and did all the right things and, was a low security level and didn't cause any issues in prison, that she would be a really good candidate for early release. So she can be released after 6 months under the statute here in Ohio, and certainly I would anticipate that the motion for judicial release on her behalf will be filed right at that 6-month mark.
What will her life be like after release? Because I know you're in this space, you're in this industry, you have clients, I imagine, who come out of prison. For someone so young, for what she pled guilty to, what is she looking at for the rest of her life?
Well, I think that was certainly part of why she took the plea, is because she now knows that she will get out. Right? She knows that worst case scenario, she took a plea that would keep her in prison for 3 years. I mean, she is a very young person. Even if she were to be released after serving, 6 months or 7 months in prison, certainly, she has a long lifeline ahead of her. And I think that was part of the victim's family members, comments during the sentencing hearing, was that she can still go on and live, and certainly Halia can't. But going to prison, having a felony like involuntary manslaughter on your record, that's obviously not sealable or expungible, it will be life-altering for her. Just the conviction alone, let alone, the circumstances, the trauma of it, the just carrying that incident forward.
One of the most tragic aspects of this, and I've covered stories like this before, is how senseless it is. There's a fight, there's a beef, young people. It should never have escalated to this, and now we have the loss of the life of a young girl, and you have, as you just mentioned, someone who's really, at the start of her life and will never be the same, and this, again, shouldn't have happened. There's an alarming stat from youth.gov where it looks at the rates of homicide, and it says homicide is the third leading cause of death for young people between 10 and 24. Are you seeing this a lot in your practice? Are you seeing a lot of teen-on-teen violence?
I am, but it's with guns. And so this fact pattern is certainly unique. Also, it's more, if we're talking sex or gender, it's usually more male on male. But absolutely, particularly in that 18, 19 space where they're not juveniles, but they've just become adults and they can be charged as adults without a bind over. Just an absolute increase in what I'm seeing even in my own clientele. But that said, this was a single stabbing, and Jesse, it's important for anyone to know that the reason why she had a knife on her was because she being the defendant in this case, had a job where she used that knife. So, I think that also goes to sort of the, how this case is different from those other types of homicides that are happening with youth right now. In other words, you're talking, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, we see youth on youth violence because of perhaps gang affiliations or something like that, a criminal element? We do. And, people carrying guns to use guns in an illegal way, right? Right. With the purpose to either protect themselves or, threaten others or actually, hurt and harm others. So certainly, I think this case is different from those as well. You have a very tough and unique job. And I think one of the things I'm always curious about, how do families and the friends who are involved in this on either side, how do they come to terms with what happened? What do you tell them? I mean, because this is such a traumatic, life-altering situation that they'll never be the same again, and they've lost loved ones. What do you tell them at a time like this? Well, in a case like this in particular, it's a sliding door moment, right? If the one hadn't been in that convenience store at the same time the other one decided to go there too in a very small town, this would have never happened. And while that seems unique, it is actually common to the cases that defense attorneys often have in this space. And I always tell my clients, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Understand that like every moment right now, feels like a decade. But you've really got to look, down the road, think of this long term. How do we get through the 3 years in prison, right? What does that look like? I try to give my clients as much information as possible because speculation never leads us to the right place. And so really just give them information. This is what prison's going to be like. This is what it'll be like with a felony on your record. Here's how you can, use resources in our community to get a job even with a felony record. And really try to give the clients that long-term perspective. Because Jesse, as you know, the short-term perspective in these cases is pretty awful. Mm-hmm. Tragic case. Diane Menasche, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you so much for speaking to the judge and getting more information about what was happening here. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.